Administrator Lyrics pressed his crystalline palm against the cool metal of the observation deck window as the last civilian transport lifted off from mining station Theta 7. The ship rose slowly through the thin atmosphere of Kepler 442b, its engines glowing blue against the pale morning sky. Behind it, dozens of other vessels carried the final evacuees from what had been a peaceful mining colony for over 40 years. The Valerian Republic had built this world into something beautiful. Crystal spires reached toward the sky from every settlement, and the gravitonium mines had provided prosperity for millions across 17 star systems. Now all of that was ending because of a single message that had arrived 3 days ago. Administrator, incoming transmission from the outer sensor grid, called Communications Officer Nala from her station near the center of the command center. Her voice carried the musical quality that all Valerians possessed, but today it held notes of fear that made Lyrics' hearts beat faster. He walked over to her console, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty command center. Most of his staff had already evacuated with their families. Only essential personnel remained to coordinate the final departure. The main display showed a tactical readout of their star system, with red markers indicating the approaching threat. "What do the sensors show?" Lyrics asked. Though he already knew the answer would be bad news, Nala's fingers danced over her controls, and the display zoomed in on the outer edge of their system. Long-range sensors detect a fleet of approximately 60 vessels approaching from Hyperspace Vector 77 Alpha. Configuration matches hegemony of Keth warships. Estimated arrival time is 4 hours and 37 minutes. Chief Engineer Barrick looked up from his station where he had been monitoring the evacuation. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of worry. "Sir, we have perhaps 200 civilians still planetside. The final transports cannot possibly evacuate everyone in time." Lyrics felt his stomach drop. The hegemony of Keth had a reputation that spread fear across half the galaxy. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were slavers who harvested entire populations and sold them to the highest bidder. Whole species had vanished into their processing centers, never to be seen again. "How long until our defensive grid comes online?" he asked, knowing the answer, but hoping for a miracle. "The mining platforms were never designed for military use," Boric replied. "We can convert maybe 6 of them to defensive positions, but their shields will only stop energy weapons for minutes at most. The hegemony fleet carries enough firepower to crack a moon." Nala suddenly straightened at her console. "Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from the approaching fleet. They're demanding our immediate surrender and the preparation of all civilians for transport." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lyrics had read the reports from other worlds that had fallen to the hegemony. They separated families, sorted people by physical capability, and shipped them to labor camps or worse across the galaxy. Children rarely survived the selection process. "Send a response," Lyrics said quietly. "Tell them we need time to prepare. Buy us whatever time you can." As Nala worked at her console, Lyrics moved to the tactical display and studied their options. The Valerian Republic had no military ships in this sector. They were a peaceful species that had never needed to develop serious weapons. Their neighbors had always been friendly traders or neutral parties. The idea that someone would simply arrive and take everything had never seemed possible. "Administrator," Nala called out, "I'm receiving responses to our earlier distress calls. The Republic Council says they cannot spare any ships. The nearest fleet is 17 days away. The Altarian Trade Union offers refuge for any ships that can reach their space, but that's a 6-day journey at best speed." Boric shook his head grimly. "The civilian transports cannot make that journey with the hegemony fleet in pursuit. Their ships are faster and better armed." Lyrics closed his eyes and tried to think. In 40 years of colonial administration, he had dealt with meteor strikes, equipment failures, labor disputes, and natural disasters. Never anything like this. Never a situation where thousands of lives depended on decisions he had no experience making. "Sir," Nala said softly, "there is one more option. The old emergency protocols mention a restricted frequency. Channel 0, It was established during the early days of galactic exploration, but no one uses it anymore. Why not? Lyrics asked. Because the only species that supposedly monitors it are the ones from the quarantine zone. The Deathworlders. Most people think they're just stories told to frighten children. Lyrics had heard those stories. Every spacefaring species knew about the quarantine zone in the Outer Rim territories. A single star system marked with navigation beacons warning all ships to stay away. The stories said that the species inside had evolved on a world so hostile that they had become something dangerous. Most academics believed it was just a myth created to explain some ancient disaster. What harm could it do? He asked. If they're just stories, no one will answer. If they're real, maybe they can help. Before Nala could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The tactical display showed new contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of their system. The hegemony fleet had arrived. Early, shields up, Boric called out, but they all knew it was pointless. The converted mining platforms began powering their defensive screens, but against a full hegemony battle fleet, they might as well have been using umbrellas against a hurricane. The first hegemony ships appeared on visual scanners. They were massive things, built more for intimidation than efficiency. Black hulls covered in spikes and weapon ports, designed to strike fear into anyone who saw them. Behind the lead ships came dozens of smaller vessels, including the dreaded transport ships where captured populations would spend their final days of freedom. They're charging weapons, Nala reported, her voice now openly shaking. Multiple plasma cannon signatures detected. Impact in 90 seconds. Lyrics looked around the command center at the handful of people who had stayed behind to help coordinate the evacuation. Good people who deserve better than this. People who had families they would never see again. Nala, he said, open channel 0, broadcast on all frequencies. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls. Channel open, sir. Lyrics took a deep breath and spoke into the communication system. His words would either reach someone who could help or disappear into the empty darkness of space. This is Administrator Lyrics of Mining Station Theta 7, Kepler 442b system. We are under attack by hegemony forces. Civilian population of approximately 40,000. We have no military capability and cannot defend ourselves. Please, if anyone is receiving this transmission, we need help. We have children here, families, please. The first plasma barrage struck their outermost defensive platform, and the entire station shook. Emergency lights bathed the command center in red as systems overloaded and sparks flew from damaged consoles. Keep transmitting, Lyric shouted over the noise of failing equipment. This is Kepler 442b to any vessel receiving, Nala called into. Her microphone as another blast rocked the station. We are under attack by hegemony forces. Civilian population of 40,000. Please, anyone. The communication array exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, cutting off their transmission. Through the observation window, Lyrics could see hegemony ships descending toward the planet's surface like hungry predators. In the distance, the last civilian transport struggled to reach orbit as enemy fighters moved to intercept it. Deep in space, far beyond the reach of their sensors, something heard their call. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, staring at the message that had just appeared on her communication console. The distress call from Kepler 442 be played again through her headphones, and each time she heard the fear in the alien voice, her jaw tightened a little more. Communication Officer Park, she called to the young man seated at the sensor station. How long ago did we receive this transmission? 14 minutes ago, Captain. The signal came through? On channel 0, just like the protocols specify. Long-range sensors confirm the location. Kepler 442b is a mining colony in the Valerian Republic. Rodriguez walked to the main tactical display where Lieutenant Torres was plotting their current position. The 7th Expeditionary Fleet had been conducting patrol operations in the outer RIM territories for 3 months, staying well away from the established shipping lanes where other species might detect them. Torres, what's our distance to the Kepler system? Approximately 47 light years, Captain. If we push the engines hard, we can be there in 6 hours. Rodriguez nodded and opened a fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Captain Rodriguez. We have received a distress call from a civilian population under attack. Prepare for emergency jump to the Kepler 442b system. Within minutes, responses came back from the other 14 ships in their fleet. The UES Nemesis, their flagship commanded by Admiral Kane, acknowledged first. Then came confirmations from the destroyers Wolverine, Hammer, and Phoenix, followed by the cruisers and support vessels that made up their battle group. The human ships were unlike anything else in the galaxy, where other species built sleek vessels designed for speed and elegance. Human engineers had created machines built for war. The hulls were thick layers of compressed steel and ceramic designed to withstand impacts that would destroy conventional spacecraft. The weapons were kinetic systems that fired solid projectiles at tremendous velocities. Rather than the energy weapons favored by most galactic civilizations, Rodriguez had been with the fleet since its formation 3 years ago, after humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had gone badly. The initial meeting with the Galactic Council had lasted exactly 47 minutes before the alien representatives fled in terror after learning about Earth's environmental conditions. Earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and predators that could kill with a single bite were apparently not normal features of inhabited worlds. Since then, humanity had been quietly watching and learning from the shadows. They monitored galactic communications, studied alien technology, and slowly built a picture of how the galaxy really worked. What they had learned was not encouraging. "Captain," Park called from his station, "I'm reading the tactical situation. At Kepler 442b, long-range sensors show approximately 60 hegemony vessels in orbit around the planet. They appear to be conducting a harvesting operation." Rodriguez felt her stomach turn. She had read the intelligence reports about the hegemony of Keth. They were one of the galaxy's major powers, built entirely on slave labor taken from conquered worlds. Entire species had disappeared into their processing centers. Any response from the local forces? "Negative, Captain. The Valerian Republic appears to have no military presence in that system. I'm detecting what look like converted mining platforms trying to provide defensive cover, but they won't last long against hegemony firepower." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Rodriguez looked around at her crew. They were all volunteers who had signed up knowing they might never see Earth again. The deep space patrol missions were dangerous and lonely, but they were necessary. Someone had to watch the galaxy's dark corners and be ready when situations like this arose. "Admiral Kane is requesting a conference call with all ship commanders," Torres reported. Rodriguez walked to her command chair and activated the secure communication system. The main screen filled with images of her fellow captains, all of them wearing the same grim expression she felt on her own face. Admiral Kane appeared in the center of the display. He was an older man who had served in Earth's naval forces before transferring to the new space fleet. His hair was gray and his face was lined with the stress of command, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kane began, "we have a situation. A civilian population is under attack by forces that intend to enslave them. Intelligence reports suggest approximately 40,000 non-combatants are at risk." Captain Davis of the UES Wolverine spoke first. "Sir, what do we know about hegemony capabilities? How do their ships match up against ours?" "Their fleet is larger," Kane replied, "but our tactical analysis suggests they rely heavily on energy weapons and intimidation tactics. Their ships are built more for show than for serious combat. However, they have numerical superiority of about 4-1. Captain Hayes of the UES Phoenix leaned forward in her chair. "What about civilian evacuation? Can we extract the population?" "That's the priority," Kane confirmed. "We go in fast, establish a perimeter around the planet, and hold long enough to get every civilian we can onto evacuation ships. Questions?" Rodriguez raised her hand. "Sir, what about galactic law? If we intervene directly, we'll be revealing humanity's capabilities to the rest of the galaxy. Kane was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's a risk we'll have to take. We didn't come out here to hide while innocents are murdered. Besides, if we do this right, there won't be any hegemony survivors to report back. The implications of that statement hung in the air. They were talking about going to war with one of the galaxy's major powers. If they succeeded, it would announce humanity's presence to every species in known space. If they failed, Earth itself might become a target. All ships will jump in formation, Kane continued. We'll drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and approach under stealth. Once we're in position, we hit them hard and fast. Remember, these are the people who enslave entire civilizations. Show them the same mercy they show their victims. The communication ended, and Rodriguez turned to her crew. You heard the Admiral. All hands to battle stations. Prepare for hyperspace jump. Throughout the ship, alarm klaxons sounded as the crew prepared for combat. In the weapon bays, technicians loaded tungsten rounds into the railgun systems. In engineering, Chief Petty Officer Williams brought the fusion reactors to full power. In the Marine barracks, Colonel Thompson briefed his soldiers on what they knew about hegemony ground forces. Jump in 30 seconds, called the navigation officer. Rodriguez strapped herself into her command chair and watched the countdown timer on the main display. In a few hours, they would either save 40,000 innocent lives or die trying. Either way, the galaxy was about to learn that humanity had not forgotten how to fight. Jump initiated, the navigator called. The stars outside the bridge windows stretched into lines of light as the UES, Retribution, and her sister ships disappeared into hyperspace, racing toward a battle that would change everything. Fleet Commander Vex stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge, watching his forces complete their harvest of the Valerian colony. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The pathetic defensive attempts by the mining platforms had been swept aside in minutes, and his ground forces were already loading the first batches of civilians onto the transport ships. The hegemony had perfected this process over hundreds of similar operations. Fear was their greatest weapon. Most species surrendered the moment they saw the black hulls of hegemony warships approaching their worlds. Those that tried to resist were quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. Commander, called Science Officer Quinn from her position at the sensor array, the last of the mining platforms has been destroyed. Ground forces report that civilian collection is proceeding ahead of schedule. Vex nodded with satisfaction. The Valerians were a particularly valuable catch. Their crystalline biology made them excellent for certain types of industrial work, and their peaceful nature meant they rarely caused problems during transport. The slave markets in the Keth Empire would pay premium prices for this cargo. What about their distress calls? He asked. Any response from Republic forces? Negative, Commander. Long-range sensors show no approaching ships. The nearest Republic. Fleet is over 2 weeks away. By then we will be long gone. That was the beauty of harvesting operations in the Outer Rim territories. The major galactic powers maintained only token forces in these systems, relying instead on defense agreements. That meant nothing when actual attacks occurred. By the time help arrived, the hegemony fleet would be halfway across the galaxy with their cargo. Vex walked to the main viewing port and looked down at the planet below. Smoke rose from several of the larger settlements where his ground forces had encountered resistance. Not much, of course. The Valerians had no real weapons and no military training. A few mining supervisors with industrial equipment had tried to slow down the collection teams, but War Master Drex's shock troops had dealt with them quickly. Commander, Quinn called again, but this time her voice carried a note of confusion. I'm detecting unusual sensor readings at the edge of the system. What kind of readings? Unknown, sir. The signatures don't match anything in our databases. Multiple contacts, but they appear to be running silent. I can barely detect them at all. Vex frowned and walked over to the tactical display. His fleet of 60 ships was spread throughout the system in a standard harvesting formation. The larger vessels remained in orbit while smaller craft ferried prisoners to the transport ships. It was a formation designed for efficiency, not defense, but that had never been a problem before. How many contacts? Difficult to determine, sir. Perhaps 15 ships, but their stealth technology is unlike anything I've seen. They seem to be materializing out of empty space. Before Vex could respond, his communication officer received an incoming message. Sir, we're being hailed by the unknown fleet. Put it through. The main screen flickered and then displayed the bridge of an alien ship unlike anything in hegemony records. The walls were made of some kind of gray metal, and the lighting was harsh and bright. At the center of the image stood a figure in a dark uniform with features that Vex had never seen before. This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the United Earth Systems Navy, the figure said in perfect galactic standard. You will immediately cease your attack on the civilian population and withdraw from this system. Vex almost laughed. A single unknown species was demanding that the mighty hegemony fleet retreat. He had conquered 17 star systems and harvested millions of slaves. Whatever these creatures were, they clearly had no idea who they were dealing with. Unknown vessel, he replied. You are interfering with a legitimate hegemony operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The alien captain's expression did not change. You have 30 seconds to begin evacuation procedures. This is your only warning. Vex cut the communication and turned to his tactical officer. Analysis of their fleet? Their ships are unusual, Commander. Very dense construction, almost like they were built to withstand tremendous impacts. I'm reading weapon signatures. I don't recognize. They appear to be kinetic systems rather than energy weapons. Kinetic weapons? Vex was genuinely surprised. Most species had abandoned such primitive technology thousands of years ago in favor of plasma cannons and particle beams. How quaint. Target their lead ship and show them what modern weapons can do. The Dominion's edge turned toward the human fleet and charged its main plasma batteries. Around it, dozens of other hegemony vessels followed suit. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a small moon. Fire, Vex commanded. Brilliant beams of superheated plasma lanced out toward the human ships, but something impossible happened. The beams struck the alien hulls and simply stopped. Instead of vaporizing metal and atmosphere, the plasma seemed to dissipate harmlessly against armor that should not have been able to survive such an attack. Impossible, Quinn breathed from her station. Their armor is absorbing the plasma. The thermal distribution is unlike anything in our records. Before Vex could process this information, the human ships returned fire. But instead of energy beams, they launched solid projectiles that moved faster than anything he had ever seen. The first tungsten round struck the hegemony cruiser Savage, fang at nearly 30% of light speed. The result was catastrophic. The kinetic energy punched through the cruiser's shields as if they were made of paper, tore through the hull from bow to stern, and exited the other side in a spray of vaporized metal and atmosphere. The ship simply came apart, its crew dead, before they even realized they were under attack. Evasive maneuvers, Vex shouted, but it was already too late. More projectiles slammed into his fleet with devastating effect. The hegemony ships had been designed to fight enemies that used energy weapons. Their shields were useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The human destroyer UES Wolverine launched a spread of kinetic torpedoes that fragmented into thousands of smaller projectiles just before impact. The frigate Cruel Talon disappeared in a cloud of debris as hundreds of tungsten fragments shredded its hull. The heavy cruiser Iron Fist tried to bring its weapons to bear, but a railgun round from the UES Phoenix punched through its reactor core, causing a fusion explosion that lit up the entire system. They're using the asteroids, Quinn reported in. Horror. Their weapons are turning space debris into projectiles. They're weaponizing the entire system. Vex watched in disbelief as human ships fired what looked like harpoons into nearby asteroids, then used some kind of gravity manipulation to accelerate the rocks to incredible velocities. A mining asteroid that had been floating peacefully for millions of years suddenly became a weapon of mass destruction, slamming into the transport ship Flesh Merchant with enough force to crack a continent. The human fighters were even worse. Small, angular craft that moved through space like predators. They ignored the elegant dogfighting tactics that most species used. Instead, they simply accelerated toward their targets and fired solid rounds that punched through armor and crew alike. Wing. Commander Hayes led her squadron against the hegemony fighter screen, and it was not a battle so much as a massacre. The hegemony pilots tried to use energy weapons and evasive maneuvers, but the human fighters simply absorbed the damage and kept coming. Their armor had been designed to survive in the vacuum of space around a star that regularly threw off lethal radiation. Plasma cannons were merely inconvenient. "Sir," called his communication officer, "War Master Drex is requesting immediate evacuation from the planet's surface. His forces are under attack by unknown ground troops." Vex barely heard him. Half his fleet was already destroyed or crippled, and the human ships showed no signs of slowing down. These creatures fought like nothing he had ever encountered. There was no elegance, no honor, no attempt to minimize casualties. They simply applied overwhelming force until their enemies stopped moving. "Commander," Quinn said quietly, "I'm detecting massive reinforcement fleets approaching our position. These are not the only human ships." On the tactical display, Vex could see more contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Not dozens of ships, but hundreds. An entire battle fleet that had been hidden in the outer system, waiting for the trap to be sprung, for the first time in his career. Fleet Commander Vex felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These were not just aliens. These were predators from a world that had taught them to hunt, and he had just learned that the hegemony was their prey. Colonel Rex Thompson felt a familiar sensation of atmospheric entry as his drop pod screamed through the upper layers of Kepler 442b's atmosphere. Around him, 200 other pods fell like deadly rain toward the planet's surface, each one carrying a human marine equipped for war. The hegemony ground forces had not expected an assault from space. Their sensors were designed to detect incoming ships, not individual drop pods that had been launched from the human fleet's cargo bays. By the time War Master Drex realized what was happening, the first wave of Marines was already on the ground. Thompson's pod hit the surface with tremendous force, its impact absorbers designed to survive crashes that would kill most species. The pod split open automatically, and he stepped out into the pale sunlight of an alien world, his powered armor making him look like a walking tank to anyone watching. "Alpha Squad report," he said into his communication system. "Sergeant Williams." "Here, sir. We're 2 kilometers east of processing Camp 7. I can see hegemony transport ships loading civilians." "Bravo Squad in position," came another voice. "We're at the main spaceport. Looks like they've got about 3,000 Valerians waiting for transport." Thompson consulted his tactical display. The hegemony had established 5 major processing camps across the planet's main continent, connected by transport routes that led to landing zones where their ships waited. The operation was efficient and well organized, which made it predictable. All squads, engage at will. Priority is civilian safety. These people have been through enough. Thompson's own target was processing Camp 3, located in what had been a peaceful mining town before the hegemony arrived. As he approached through the crystalline forest that covered much of the planet's surface, he could see the camp through his helmet's magnification system. The hegemony had built temporary structures to house the captured Valerians while they sorted them by age and physical capability. The younger and stronger individuals were being loaded onto transport vehicles, while the elderly and injured were being herded into separate areas. Thompson had read enough intelligence reports to know what that meant. His squad approached the camp perimeter, where hegemony shock troops stood guard. These were not members of the Keth species itself, but soldiers from conquered worlds who had been genetically modified and conditioned to serve their masters. They were larger and stronger than baseline humans, but they had never faced opponents who had evolved on a Deathworld. "Contact," Corporal Martinez over the communication system. 6 hostiles at the north gate. Thompson watched through his scope as Martinez and Private Johnson engaged the guards. The hegemony soldiers were carrying energy weapons that glowed with bright plasma charges, but when they fired at the approaching Marines, the beams simply scattered off armor designed to withstand solar radiation and micrometeorite impacts. The human response was brutally efficient. Martinez fired a single round from his kinetic rifle, and the tungsten projectile punched through the guard's body armor as if it were made of paper. Johnson followed up with a burst from his automatic weapon, and 2 more guards fell before they could react. The remaining hegemony soldiers tried to take cover behind their transport vehicles, but human weapons had been designed for war on a planet where everything was trying to kill you. Cover that would stop energy weapons provided no protection against chemically propelled projectiles moving at supersonic speeds. Gates secured, Martinez reported, moving to release the civilians. Thompson advanced on the camp's main compound, where hundreds of Valerian families huddled together in improvised holding areas. The crystalline-skinned aliens looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope as his armored figure approached. He activated his suit's translation system and spoke in the musical tones of the Valerian language. "We are here to help. Stay calm and follow our instructions." A Valerian female approached him hesitantly. Her crystalline skin was cracked with stress lines, and she clutched a small child to her chest. "Are you with the Republic fleet?" "No," Thompson replied. "We're from Earth. We heard your distress call." The female's large eyes widened with recognition. "Deathworlders," she whispered. Thompson had heard that term before in intelligence briefings. It was what most galactic species called humans, based on the environmental conditions of Earth. To them, a planet with active volcanism, severe weather, and apex predators was literally a world of death. "We're here to get you to safety," he said. "Can you help organize the others for evacuation?" Before she could answer, explosion echoed across the camp. Thompson spun toward the sound and saw smoke rising from the western perimeter. "Bravo Squad, report." "We're taking heavy fire, sir," came Sergeant Davis's voice over the communication system. "Hegemony reinforcements with heavy weapons. They've got some kind of particle cannon." Thompson consulted his tactical display and saw that Davis's squad was pinned down at Processing Camp 5. The hegemony forces had brought up a mobile weapons platform equipped with military-grade firepower. "Hold your position, Bravo. Charlie Squad, converge on Bravo's location." As his squads maneuvered across the planet's surface, Thompson continued organizing the civilian evacuation. The Valerians were cooperative but terrified, having lived through 3 days of hegemony occupation. Many of them had injuries that needed treatment, and some of the children were in shock from what they had witnessed. "Colonel," came a new voice over his communication system. It was Dr. James Hart, the fleet's chief medical officer, who had landed with the second wave. "I'm establishing a field hospital at Landing Zone Alpha. We need to get the wounded civilians there as soon as possible." Thompson looked around the camp and realized that the situation was more complex than a simple rescue operation. These people needed medical care, food, and psychological support. They had been traumatized by the hegemony's brutal methods, and many of them were in no condition to travel. "Doc, what's your assessment of Valerian physiology? Can they handle transport in our ships?" "They're fragile compared to humans," Hart replied. "Lower bone density, more sensitive to atmospheric changes. We'll need to modify our transport procedures. Also, Colonel, I'm seeing evidence of systematic abuse. The hegemony hasn't just been collecting these people. They've been conditioning them." Thompson felt his jaw tighten inside his helmet. The intelligence reports had mentioned hegemony conditioning programs, but seeing the evidence firsthand was different. These were families who had been living peaceful lives until 3 days ago. Now they were traumatized refugees who might never fully recover from their experience. "Sir," called Martinez from across the camp, "we've got a problem. I'm detecting hegemony reinforcements approaching from the south. Looks like a full battalion with heavy support." Thompson activated his long-range sensors and confirmed the report. A large force of hegemony ground troops was approaching their position, apparently trying to retake the processing camps and secure their valuable cargo. All squads, prepare defensive positions. Priority is civilian protection. Do not let the enemy reach the processing areas. As his Marines took up positions around the camp, Thompson opened a communication channel to the fleet. Admiral Kane, this is Colonel Thompson. We need immediate air support at grid reference 77 Alpha. Large enemy force approaching civilian concentration. Kane's voice came back immediately, acknowledged Colonel. Wing Commander Hayes is vectoring fighters to your position. Hold fast. Thompson looked up at the sky and saw contrails approaching from orbit. Human fighters dropping through the atmosphere to provide close air support. But he also knew that the real battle was just beginning. The hegemony would not give up their prize easily, and there were still thousands of civilians scattered across the planet who needed rescue. In the distance, he could hear the sound of approaching vehicles and the distinctive whine of hegemony. Energy weapons charging. The enemy was coming and they were bringing everything they had. All Marines, he said into his communication system, remember why we're here. These people asked for help, and we answered. Nobody gets left behind. The battle for Kepler 442b was about to begin in earnest. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Nemesis, watching the tactical display as the situation in the Kepler system reached its breaking point. His fleet had successfully engaged the initial hegemony force, destroying over half of their ships and driving the survivors into retreat. But long-range sensors had detected something that changed everything. Admiral, called Lieutenant Foster from the communication station, I'm receiving a transmission from the approaching hegemony reinforcement fleet. They're demanding our immediate surrender and the return of all captured Valerian civilians. Kane studied the sensor readout with growing concern. The reinforcement fleet was massive, over 200 ships including several dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in his own force. Supreme Admiral Feck himself was leading the fleet, according to intelligence intercepts. This was no longer a simple rescue operation. This was war. What's the status of civilian evacuation? He asked. Colonel Thompson reports at his ground. Forces have secured 4 of the 5 processing camps. Approximately 38,000 civilians are now under our protection, but many of them require medical attention before they can be transported. Kane walked to the main viewing port and looked out at the planet below. Somewhere down there, thousands of innocent people were depending on his decisions. The easy choice would be to load as many civilians as possible onto his ships and retreat before the hegemony reinforcements arrived. But that would mean abandoning anyone who could not be immediately evacuated. Sir, Foster continued, Supreme Admiral Feck is offering terms. He says we can leave with the civilians we've already rescued if we provide them with information about our homeworld and military capabilities. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present understood the implications of that demand. If the hegemony learned Earth's location, they would eventually come with a fleet large enough to harvest humanity itself. 8 billion people would share the fate of the Valerians. Kane activated the fleet communication system. All ship commanders report to Secure Channel 7 for immediate conference. Within minutes, the familiar faces of his captains appeared. On the main screen, Captain Rodriguez of the Retribution, Captain Davis of the Wolverine, Captain Hayes of the Phoenix, and the commanders of his other ships. They all wore the same grim expression as they waited for his orders. Ladies and gentlemen, Kane began, we have a situation. The approaching hegemony fleet outnumbers us 10 to 1. They're demanding information about Earth in exchange for safe passage. I want your opinions. Captain Rodriguez spoke first. Sir, with respect, we didn't come out here to negotiate with slavers. These people sent a distress call and we answered. That has to mean something. The tactical situation is not favorable, Davis added, but our ships are designed for exactly this type of engagement. If we can choose the battlefield, we might be able to even the odds. Kane nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. Foster, open a channel to Supreme Admiral Feck. The main screen flickered and then displayed the bridge of a hegemony. Dreadnought. The ship's interior was designed for intimidation, with dark surfaces and harsh lighting that created deep shadows. At the center stood a figure that Kane recognized from intelligence files. Supreme Admiral Thek was a member of the Keth species, tall and heavily built with gray skin and predatory features. He had commanded hegemony fleets for over 30 years and had never lost a major engagement. His reputation for brutality was legendary even by hegemony standards. "So," Thek said in perfect galactic standard, "these are the famous Deathworlders. You're smaller than I expected." Kane kept his expression neutral. "Supreme Admiral, I understand you have terms to discuss." "Indeed. You have interfered with a legitimate hegemony operation and destroyed valuable ships and personnel. However, I am prepared to allow you to depart with your current cargo in exchange for navigation data to your homeworld." "Counterproposal," Kane replied. "You withdraw your forces from this system immediately, and we won't turn your entire fleet into scrap metal." Thak's expression did not change, but Kane could see calculation in his eyes. The Supreme Admiral had undoubtedly studied the tactical reports from the initial engagement and was trying to assess human capabilities. "You are outnumbered 10 to 1, Thak said. "Your ships are impressive, but numbers matter in warfare. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to galactic conventions." Kane smiled grimly. "Supreme Admiral, I don't think you understand what you're dealing with. We're not just another species with faster ships and better weapons, we're humans. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to fight not because we wanted to, but because everything else on our world was trying to eat us." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "You want to know about Earth? It's a planet where the weather can kill you, where the ground shakes without warning, where massive storms can level entire cities. It's a world covered mostly by water so deep and cold that most species would die in minutes. The native life forms include creatures that can bite through steel and others that can kill with a single sting." Thek leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly aroused. "We didn't become apex predators by accident," Kane continued. "We became predators because on Earth, you're either a predator or you're food. And Supreme Admiral, you just threatened our pack." Kane cut the communication and turned to his tactical officer. "Deploy the Prometheus weapons. Signal all ships to implement Protocol 7. Throughout the human fleet, previously hidden weapon systems came online. The Prometheus devices were humanity's most closely guarded secret, weapons that could manipulate gravitational fields to turn asteroids and space debris into kinetic projectiles. But that was only the beginning." "Sir," called the tactical officer, "Prometheus systems are active. We have targeting solutions on over 300 objects in the system, including several large asteroids and the remains of the destroyed hegemony ships." The hegemony reinforcement fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships arranged in the traditional battle lines that had served them well for centuries. Supreme Admiral Thek clearly intended to overwhelm the human fleet through sheer numbers and firepower. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy that had turned the entire star system into a weapon. The first Prometheus strike used a mining asteroid that had been orbiting the system's outer planets for millions of years. Human gravity manipulators accelerated it to nearly 15% of light speed and sent it crashing into the center of the hegemony formation. The impact released more energy than a fusion bomb, destroying 6 ships instantly and crippling a dozen others, but that was just the opening move. Captain Hayes launched her fighters not just as attack craft, but as guidance systems for debris clouds created by the initial strike. The wreckage of destroyed hegemony ships became shrapnel moving at tremendous velocities, guided by human pilots who used their fighters like shepherds directing a deadly flock. "They're using our own ships against us," came Thak's voice over the communication channel, which had apparently remained open. "This is impossible." Kane watched the tactical display as his fleet executed maneuvers that would have been impossible for most species. Human ships diving into asteroid fields and using the rocks as cover while their weapon systems turned the asteroids themselves into ammunition. Fighters that ignored conventional tactics and simply rammed enemy vessels, their pilots protected by armor designed to survive atmospheric re-entry. "Tactical officer," Kane called. "Status of the stellar compression cannon?" "Charging to full power, sir. We'll have a firing solution on the enemy flagship in 30 seconds. The stellar compression cannon was an experimental weapon that used controlled fusion reactions to create miniature stars that could be projected at enemy targets. It was devastatingly effective but required enormous amounts of power and had never been tested in actual combat. "Sir," Foster called from his station. "Colonel Thompson reports that all civilians have been evacuated to secure locations. Medical teams are treating the wounded." Kane nodded. The primary mission was complete. Every Valerian civilian was now under human protection. But the battle was far from over. On the tactical display, he could see that the hegemony fleet was adapting to human tactics. Thake was pulling his ships back into tighter formations and using concentrated firepower to clear paths through the debris fields. The Supreme Admiral was proving to be as capable as his reputation suggested. "Admiral," called Captain Rodriguez over the communication system, "my ship has taken heavy damage to the port weapons array. I'm down to 60% firepower." Similar reports came in from other ships. The human fleet was winning, but they were paying a price for it. Kane realized that he needed to end this battle quickly before his forces were too damaged to continue. "All ships," he said into the fleet communication system, "prepare for Operation Ragnarok. This ends now." Operation Ragnarok was the human fleet's ultimate contingency plan. A coordinated strike using every weapon system simultaneously? It would either destroy the enemy fleet completely or exhaust the human ammunition reserves and leave them defenseless. "Stellar. Compression cannon ready," reported the tactical officer. Kane looked at the image of Supreme Admiral Thak on his screen. The hegemony commander was still trying to rally his forces, but Kane could see the fear in his alien features. This was not how galactic warfare was supposed to work. "Fire," Kane commanded. The stellar compression cannon unleashed a miniature star that crossed the space between fleets in seconds. When it struck Thak's flagship, the fusion reaction vaporized the entire vessel and created a brief new sun in the darkness of space. The remaining hegemony ships scattered in panic as human weapon systems opened fire simultaneously. Kinetic rounds, guided missiles, gravity weapons, and conventional explosives all reached their targets at the same moment, creating a symphony of destruction that lit up the entire system. When the light faded, the hegemony reinforcement fleet was gone. A few ships had managed to escape into hyperspace, but over 90% of Thak's forces had been destroyed or crippled beyond repair. Kane opened a communication channel to all remaining enemy vessels. "This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the United Earth Systems Navy. You will withdraw from this system immediately and report to your superiors that Kepler 442b is now under human protection. Any attempt to return will result in the complete destruction of your forces." 3 days later, the human fleet prepared to depart for home. The Valerian civilians had been relocated to a protected world far from hegemony space, and Administrator Lyrics had been appointed as the first Valerian ambassador to Earth. As the UES Nemesis prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Kane received a priority message from Earth Command. 17 other species had sent distress calls to Channel 0, asking for human assistance against various threats. Kane smiled as he looked out at the stars. Humanity's isolation was over, but the galaxy was about to learn that Deathworlders made the most loyal allies and the most terrifying enemies. The age of human expansion had begun.